Good evening, and welcome to the Pompey Politics Podcast, the show where we discuss national, local, and international issues in a calm, balanced, and reasonable way to get to the heart of the matter. I'm Ian Tiny Morris.
And I'm Simon Sansbury.
Apologies for the little delay at the start there, Simon. I missed the intro music and was feeling about in the dark for a minute, but if only I would have had a smartphone to help me, which is an almost seamless segue, like a rhinoceros in a china shop, into tonight's episode.
It is. Yes. So today we are asking the question: should smartphones be banned from classrooms, or indeed from children under a certain age from having them, or should there be legislation preventing children from accessing social media, for example? So we've got some experts to share their views and to talk to us about what's actually happening in today's classrooms, because you might have guessed that it's been a little while since Ian and I were actually in one as a recipient of education. Sorry, Ian, let that one go. And it would be interesting to know what's actually happening. So, yeah, just to give us an idea of what is really kind of happening around the world. Several countries have actually banned the use of mobile phones in primary and secondary schools. So France, Italy, the Netherlands, Brazil, even Rwanda has banned them. China's banned them since 2021 without schools being brought onto phones being brought onto school premises without written parental consent. And Italy even bans smartphones and tablets for educational use. So with all of that in mind, should the UK follow suit and enact some form of legislation, or should it be something done on a school-by-school basis? Who knows? But to help us try to figure that out, we've got Mark Coates, who, as well as being a teacher, is also the councillor for Hayling East. So thank you very much for joining us, Mark.
Absolute pleasure. I'm not sure I've made my mind up yet.
That's fine.
Either way, I'll be honest.
To be fair, we're not actually writing the legislation today, so we're all right. We just want to have that open discussion. So one of those rare things in politics where we can discuss and even change our mind. Who knows? We're also joined by Nick Dorrington, who's the cabinet member for Children, Families and Education on Portsmouth Council. Welcome very much. Welcome, Nick, and thanks very much for joining us.
Good evening.
Okay, and we are also joined by Rachel Speed, who is also a teacher. So thank you very much for joining us, Rachel, to give us your view of today's classrooms and indeed the experience of kind of what may or may not be good or bad ideas and what's actually happening. So welcome to you all. Thank you. So our first question, and I'll start that first with Mark, is good or bad? What's your experience of the places of smartphones and the use of social media in the classroom among school children? What would you say? What's happening now, Mark?
Overall, it's bad without a shadow of a doubt. I would the smartphones, not all bad, but social media by and large means that if you have an incident in school, then it can be amplified, it can be protracted. As a result of the access to social media, you can end up with people from other schools getting involved pretty quickly. You can end up with parents getting involved pretty quickly. I see it as nothing other than adding multiple ripples to the concentric circle, and it's entirely negative in my experience. Social media. I mean, of course, if I'm trying to advocate for it, a lot of schools use social media very well to get their message out there, to show great work of students, to try and mute or put a sort of damp towel over the flames of something bad that's happened. You know, the schools themselves might be able to use it constructively, but for students, I can't think of a single good incident when it comes to social media.
Okay. That's interesting. So, Rachel, what's your experience and thoughts from the classroom?
Yeah, I think I agree with Mark in terms of social media. It is sort of resoundingly negative, I think, especially the way that students are using it is not massively positive. There's some kind of small exceptions to that. I know my tutor group have got their own sort of WhatsApp group that they have, that they discuss what's going on, you know, do I need my PE kit tomorrow, all that kind of stuff. which they kind of use quite positively. And there's been few issues with that, but on the wider scale, it just does seem to take a huge amount of time, especially with the pastoral staff. I know our house team spends quite a lot of time dealing with, such and such sent this message to me last night, and it's had this impact. I think sort of smartphones more widely are not potentially as negative as the social media. We do use quite a lot of apps kind of within school of things that they use. Things like their homework is sort of shown that they can have on an app on their phone, etc. But yeah, definitely social media I think is really quite negative, just partly because of the way that they use it, I think. So yeah, it's not overly positive.
Okay, and lastly, Nick, what's your thoughts?
So my thoughts are mixed and varied on the basis that smartphones in general are a tool, but part of that tool comes with the particularly social media element of it. And a huge amount of children now are immersing themselves in a world which isn't real. And they're taking a lot of influences from things that don't exist. So other people are putting on the perception of the world that they wish to create, and then our children seem to be buying into that sort of that vision or that persona of something, and it can be very distracting for children, because it seems to be an unhealthy and unrealistic of what the world is actually like. There's also the online bullying, which again is where people, certainly children, can say things or do things that years ago would have been in a very small percentage. Now it's opened up to so much that people get on a bandwagon of things, and once negative comments can come through, other people can jump on it with no risk of any consequence. So the whole system can kind of get out of hand, and I do believe that social media per se is quite detrimental to our youth.
Okay.
No, thank you.
Thank you for that.
Nick.
Oh, sorry. And I was just going to say,
Carry on.
sorry, and not without a hint of irony, I was just going to say, as we've all just said that social media can be a bad tool, please do remember to comment and follow and subscribe. Follow us on Facebook and subscribe on YouTube, and join the conversation on Facebook or YouTube if you'd like to take part. But other than that, irony dispensed with. Ian.
Yeah. So, and again, I think the consensus there about a tool and a double-edged sword and all of those kind of things. So if I can start with yourself, Rachel, what is your school doing at the moment, trying to control that, and does it work? Again, the danger is always, and I would never do it myself, but the picking up the smartphone just to check who's messaged you. Have you got any control measures in place at your school, and
Yeah.
do they work?
So this year, so starting in September, I wasn't at the school previously, but I understand the rule has changed, that previously they were not allowed phones in lessons, but they were allowed to use them at sort of social time, break and lunchtime. That rule has now changed to sort of a blanket ban on the use of phones in school from when they come onto school site at sort of 8 a.m. until sort of 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And the phones are supposed to be turned off and in their bag. The school behaviour policy is quite kind of robust in that if you do see a phone or you hear a phone, then teachers are sort of required to remove that phone and it's taken away, and they can collect it at the end of the day. So from that point of view, I don't see a huge amount of phones being used, but that doesn't really mitigate the issues that we talked about earlier in terms of the social media, because that stuff wasn't really happening at school anyway. That was happening outside of school, in the evenings, at the weekends, etc. So it doesn't really take that away. But I don't see phones generally during the day at school. Students are quite good at saying, oh, I need to call my mum to put some money on my account or whatever, and actually there's a rule for that. They go and reception rings them. So I don't see a phone during the day, so in that way that does work, but yeah, it doesn't mitigate the issues outside of school.
Oh, that's brilliant. So what about yourself, Mark, in your school? Similar kind of situation, or are you forever trying to snatch the phones out of the hands of those who are staring at them rather than listening to your insightful work?
Well, to be honest, it sounds more relaxed than most schools, but I don't have a lot of problems during lesson. The issue, they're allowed to have them out at break and lunch, which I find odd, but not in the corridors between lessons. And those are the moments when they want to get them out. Teachers, by and large, and I'm sure we don't see half of what goes on, but by and large, during lessons, has not been the big battle. Every now and then, someone will, and then going on to that next point that I think you're gonna come to, getting the phone off of the pupil is another story that can be straightforward or not. But there's a real attachment issue there. But yeah, in between is tricky. In between is tricky. They just want to check. They just they've got an impulse to know what's happened and to check that ticker tape, that feed, and to keep their streak or whatever it is. It's there's a bit of an addiction going on there, which is tough to tackle.
So are they just as addicted to their phones as we all are then, essentially?
If not more so. Yeah. And I'm quite happy to, if we're turning it into a Phones Anonymous meeting, I'm quite happy to say, I look at it too much. My hours go up too much during the holidays in particular. But some of the hours are extraordinary. When you ask them to check during tutor time, I was like, how many hours have you spent on your phone every day? It's extraordinary, absolutely extraordinary, high use.
So Nick, I guess in your role, I guess you're talking with quite a lot of educators. What sort of mitigations are you seeing across the schools of Portsmouth, and is this a conversation that sort of comes to cabinet to discuss from a policy perspective, or is it kind of left to each individual school?
So with regards to mobile devices actually in schools, this isn't something that comes to cabinet. It's not something that's regular in cabinet itself. Looking at social media around children and around the impact of social media on children, that is something that's discussed. And indeed, there's been a number of motions that have been put forward with regards to that. Each school in Portsmouth, obviously, it's up to them how they want to deal with the matters. So there are no government sort of guidelines with them. So there's a real mix. And as we've already heard today, some schools have tried banning phones altogether. Some are looking at restricted usage of phones, so some won't let phones out in class. Others are looking at more the educational approach, so educating children around phones and around the dangers of particularly what they can access online.
So more kind of trying to control content rather than trying to put rules in around usage or having them.
Yes.
Brilliant. No, thank you for that.
Well, that's a beautiful segue. It's almost like we prepared that. So thank you, Nick. So parents and teachers highlight concerns about the disruptive impact in classrooms, on attention, the mental health impacts, which I think you've all kind of alluded to, from cyberbullying to exposure to harm and age inappropriate content, or those intending to do children harm. How real are those threats, and that people often talk about? If I'll go first to Nick, if that's all right. How much do they come
I
up?
believe that my personal opinion on this, and also there's been. Oh, are we okay on the internet still? Something's come up on the screen. Yeah, we're still good to go. Okay.
Yeah,
there's a bit of a delay here. So just recently there's been an NSPC survey, and they reckon 1 in 5 children are subject to cyberbullying in some way, shape, or form. Now, cyberbullying does have a massive impact on the mental stability of our children. I personally believe that. Years ago, if you got bullied at school, you would go home, and home would become your safe place. You'd shut the door, you'd close the curtain, you'd sit in with mum and dad, and that would be where you would be safe. Nowadays, with social media, that's no longer the case. Kids are, as we've heard, almost addicted to their phones, as adults are too. So we all know that, and that feels. But there's a certain dopamine level that comes with that. If you're continuously looking at the phone, trying to get some sort of validation from other people of your age or your age group, that validation can come in many different ways. Sometimes it can be positive, sometimes it could be negative, and we will test the waters, or children will test the waters with regards to comments and those sorts of things in order to get the most amount of validation, because it hits those dopamine levels to us. And some of that stuff that they're commenting on can be really detrimental to the person who's being bullied, and they're not directly connected to that person, so they're not seeing that person, so they're not experiencing the consequences for that young child. So I personally believe that social media around children is very much a threat.
Thank you very much. Anyone particularly want to go next on that one? Rachel?
I'm just sort of going to add to that with something a bit different. I think that we've talked a lot about social media. I think that's kind of quite well understood, the impact that can have. But the impact that I'm kind of seeing, especially sort of since post-COVID as well, is the attention span that children have. So if they're watching TikTok videos that are sort of 10, 15 seconds long, that's their attention span. And if I'm trying to explain some sort of, concept to them in my lessons, that is not taking me 15 seconds. And therefore, the level of attention they have, they're just so used to literally just like swipe, 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 something new, something new, something new, that the attention span that I see in the students is just minimal, and they can't focus. And it's very hard to get them to focus for an extended period of time on anything that isn't giving them some instant gratification, that they're then seeing something new or moving on to something new, or they're feeling successful because they've watched this video, they're on to the next one. I think that's something from an education point of view, from a teaching point of view in a classroom, is really what I'm seeing as a huge problem, just day to day.
Thank you. Mark, what about yourself?
I mean, that habitual element is massive. And I think you can't talk about phones in schools without talking about phones at home. And that's the point. It's invasive. You can't get away from any issues at school because you go home and they're still there, and they're in your bedroom. They're there when you go to sleep. You might be looking at them at 11 o'clock at midnight. And that's, I think, another reason that we've seen school attendance plummet, is because we got some kids that are scared to come in, because that hasn't gone away. That anxiety is just heightened, and it's built, and that problem, you can't let any air out of that tire anymore, because it's just incessant, and I'm worried about a lot of things, and how he's and I'll just bring one other thing that hasn't come up forward, and that's the fact that phone is a misnomer. We call them phones, but that's the last thing that millennials do, actually, is that they'll message and they might leave voice notes, but they can't use phones, and they struggle to speak to people. They struggle with eye contact. They struggle to sustain conversation. That's one thing. And I promise you, this is not a political pitch. It doesn't matter who had done it, but the oracy element that Simon mentioned before they got in, and that I'm still yet to see a big oracy element come in a meaningful way. But that's huge, that the kids really struggle with speaking and listening. And it's the one thing that AI can't do. And when they're in any sort of, high intense situation like this, or an interview, they need to be able to do it. And I think that actually oracy and listening have got worse in relation to this, this embedding themselves and their personality, as Nick said, into a phone instead of into tangible, real face-to-face life.
I think there's, like, as well with that, just to jump in on that, there's other skills they're missing. You think the amount of time they spend with a phone in their hand, they'd be quite tech savvy, and the amount of time they spend playing on computers or whatever at home, they would be quite tech savvy. But a year 8 can't send me an email with their work attached. They can't save a Word document on the computer somewhere. Actually, they're really fast at typing with their thumbs, but typing on a keyboard they can't do. So it's not transferring to the skills that they're really actually going to need in a work environment. They're still going to need to be able to do those things, and they're not tech savvy at all in that respect. It only works on a touch screen.
Yeah, completely agree with that. Video. It's not, time on phones is not synonymous with digital literacy. Completely agree.
Okay.
That's an interesting angle. That's a very interesting perspective, because I think most people might have assumed that digital literacy would come from, they're on technology all the time. So I guess my next question, if I can come to you first, Mark, is can we put this genie back in the bottle? Does it need that kind of state influence to ban them? And it sounds like it's more than just schools. Is it something that the state does need to intervene to protect young people from the harmful kind of impact of these devices?
I'm going to say yes, it needs robust and immediate action. And I think we are behind. That's almost inevitable, isn't it? Being behind the technology curve. Technology does its thing, and designers and and the people that respond to users tend to spearhead that vehicle, and we're all left trying to, you know, sort of hanging on to the rear bumper. China seemed to have done that. I think that was mentioned earlier by Simon. You said there was a blanket ban. I think there's not quite a blanket ban. I think they're allowed a little sort of to dip their toe in the water. They're allowed 40 minutes on their equivalent of TikTok. Is it Douyin or Douyin? I think is, and they're allowed their 40 minutes if they're under 18, just to sort of stay on the straight and narrow, like methadone, whatever it is. But they're much more on it, aren't they? There's a lot more control. God, state control, dangerous, isn't it? I'm really interested in Nick's answer to this, particularly as a Liberal Democrat. You know, how much freedom you give industry and you give users in the face of something that has taken over and that is defining young people's lives, and for me is damaging and unhelpful.
Well, I'm going to throw to Nick as our other politician. What's your thoughts, Nick? Is state intervention and a ban the way forward?
So I think when you look at state intervention, bearing in mind we're dealing with tech giants, and the only commodity they have is your time and attention. That's what they trade in. That's their stock and trade. So to fight with the tech giants is going to be tremendously difficult for us to make any real headway in the early days. I think it's something that possibly can come over a period of time. However, I do believe that, like most things, you don't know there's a problem until a problem arises, and then you don't know the impact of that problem until a generational sort of passes. So I think as the children of today become the parents of tomorrow, then I think they will start to implement some more things around social media, because they will have experienced exactly how that stuff has affected them during their childhood. We're only kind of concerned with it now because we didn't live in that era. We didn't go through that era. And there's certain things that we implement around our children now. So I see it quite a lot around the parenting of today, which is only the fears of the parents of yesterday, if that kind of makes sense. So I do believe that this stuff will get to a point and then it will plateau. And then once it plateaus, the people themselves will start to implement things. However, I would have liked to have seen some kind of restrictions from the tech giants around our sort of children long before now. Maybe they didn't know there was going to be an issue until such a large issue arose from it also.
Interesting, relying on the massive tech companies to police themselves. I think I think your generational kind of thing might be might have more legs than the Apple not looking to sell us new phones. Other phone providers are available. So Rachel, as the person who I think before we started, you said you were just at school with the growing up with smartphones. Your thought on a ban and looking back to that for your younger self, how might you have felt about them taking the BlackBerry away?
Yeah, I don't know. It's difficult to kind of say, but I mean, I was very much kind of policed by my parents, I guess you could say. Like I did have a phone and I did have a smartphone when they came out, but it was only sort of the cheapest one that was available. And like I mentioned before, we had such a small amount of internet on our contracts that we were not really on the internet as much as children are today. It's just changed so quickly. I think, like sort of Nick alluded to, it's changed so quickly that keeping up with that, especially, I'm not a politician, I'm not that involved in politics, but it does seem to me that things just take a little while to kind of happen in politics, and it can't quite keep pace with everything that's happening. Even in the last sort of year or so, the changes that have happened to, I never used AI much before, but this year I've been using AI quite a lot. That was kind of new to me. So, I don't know. I think at the moment it's very much kind of a parent thing. Like the school has their rules, and how well those rules are potentially kept to is a little bit to do with how much the parents are dealing with it at home and stuff as well. So yeah, I'm not sure.
No, and I don't. Yeah, I think it's a very kind of it's a tricky area. I guess just a sort of supplementary question, for both of you are working as teachers. Do you feel you get that support broadly from the parents in terms of of supporting the school's stance on smartphones and trying to encourage young people to use them less?
I think there's other things, like other rules that we have that they're more concerned about, I think, than the phone rule. I think quite a lot of parents do understand. I've got a year 7 tutor group, and most of them do have phones, but not a lot of them tend to have sort of the latest, sort of most expensive model, which a lot of the older students do tend to have. So they're kind of managed in that way. So yeah, it's not too bad. I think parents are generally quite supportive when things like cyberbullying and stuff come up as an issue, and the sanctions and the consequences that go with that. I think is generally quite well supported.
Brilliant.
I'm
Mark?
gonna, well, I'm going to cite inevitably, and I don't know if it was part of the decision to do this, but I'm going to cite adolescence, and I'm going to say that that parents, I should have brought it out myself. I think Rachel's absolutely spot on. You need triangulation between industry and schools and parents in order to guide young people, and we don't know half of what they're up to, and there's not enough monitoring. And I think the fact that, I suppose you could make the argument that tech giants are putting age restrictions on, like Discord is 17 plus. I think I read leading up to this that WhatsApp 17 plus. None of that is, and this is where state, I suppose, could get involved and say you need to evidence that, but none of that's implemented by parents. They don't know what's going on, but then again, they are supportive. If you were to say we've got this new policy, will you sort of sign on the dotted line? I think they would support schools. So there's some triangulation and some teamwork that needs to go on between the schools and the parents, the state, and industry. I think in order to have some consistency. But as all of us have said, we're hanging on to the coattails. We're behind the curve, and that's something I agree with Nick. This is not a quick fix. This is something that's going to need to monitored and evolve over the next few years, because it's not going away, this issue.
Fair enough. Thank you. Just before I go on to the next question, I'm just going to share one of the comments that we had from the viewers. It's a bit deep, this, so thank you, Johnny. The smartphone has become the center of everyone's universe. Each star can move further and closer away, and we are all black holes consuming it all. So it's a bit deep for this time on a Sunday evening, but thank you for that. That's definitely
it backs
true.
Up the runaway. Well, it backs up the runaway train idea that we've been talking about. It really is. It's fundamental to most people's existence in the West. Yeah,
it's certainly difficult to escape, and maybe I don't know. Maybe it's unfair to expect a different behaviour when it comes to smartphones and social media from our children than we demonstrate ourselves. I don't know, that just kind of.
When we talk about literacy and reading, and we talk about parents at home picking up books and reading. Those are the kids that are going to read, and if they're at home watching parents looking at their phones and not listening to them, they're going to look at their phones and not listen to us. So 100%, you're right there. I don't think you need to not know. You're absolutely on the button.
Okay, so let's talk about the flip side then. So what's the argument for the positive impact of us now having because in one degree we should be the most informed than we've ever been in history, because we've got access to more information than we've ever had at any one time. We should be in theory understanding and communicating with each other, because we're never more connected than we've ever been at any point in our history. We've got access to the sum of human knowledge literally in our hands. But does this technology actually have a productive place in schools? We focused about some of the detrimental aspects, but are there positive sides to that? Nick, did you want to lead off on that one?
So whether we're looking at in schools or in life in general, as someone who suffers quite severely with dyslexia, the phone is fundamentally important to the way in which I conduct myself now, with the use of talk-to-type technology, with the use of some of the software that will read emails to me, with AI that will give me the intent of the email, with all of those things now available at my fingertips, it enables me to communicate with people in a far better way than I ever could before. For someone who's neurodiverse like myself, it was trying to put words down on paper or on a screen was incredibly fearful. So it would restrict me from actually doing that. It was always great on, communicating on the telephone, talking to someone, but to actually put those words down and articulate those words was something beyond what I could do, because my mind worked faster than my fingers. And when my fingers typed, you never quite knew what was coming ahead anyway. With the use of the smartphone and with the use of AI, that's another tool at our disposal, and of course with Google for search engines, I feel it does open up, it makes things far easier for people like myself to be able to communicate with the mainstream. So there's definitely a place for that kind of technology.
Okay, that's thank you. Rachel, thoughts on the positive impacts?
Yeah, I think there is positive impacts. I mean, as teachers, I don't know about Mark's school, but my school, we're definitely using lots of online platforms that we can set students sort of homework and stuff through. Things like that are great. Teachers, in terms of a workload saver, like they have online quizzes and stuff that we can just straight away see the marks they've got and how long they've spent on it. Crucially as well, it tells you if your student has spent 3 minutes getting 10% on their homework, or they've spent the amount of time you'd like them to spend on it. From that point of view, it's really positive. We use kind of Google Classroom and Teams and that sort of stuff to kind of share with them lesson resources and revision guides and all that kind of stuff, which is really useful for students. So it is useful and it is productive. And some schools are investing quite heavily in technology in the classroom. I know the last sort of school I worked with, we had Chromebooks available in the classroom for students to use, which was really nice because we could do sort of online research and stuff. Nowadays, at the school that I'm at, if we want them to do that, we can say to them, actually, you can get your phones out now. We're going to do a bit of stuff on the phones. So it can be really, really positive, but it's all about, the education of how to use these things as well. I think, like we mentioned before, they're not particularly good at knowing how to use certain things. Some of the homeworks and stuff I've received when they've had sort of research to do, it's just a load of nonsense because they've just gone onto the first website and copied and pasted it, and they don't understand this principle of, fake news, and not everything you read on the internet is true. So yeah, it definitely does. It is productive. It is nice to have all these things that they have access to, but I'm a little bit old school in the way that I'd like them to know how to use a library as well. I quite got a lot out of that when I was at university. I didn't find everything on the internet. And that definitely is sort of a missing link, I think, in schools at the moment.
Thank you, Mark.
Crumbs. I mean, yeah, there are some. I think I'm very old school. I think I'd rather we carried on without phones and they were just all locked away, because I think the cost is greater than the benefit. But if we're talking about benefits, yeah, there are some really good online platforms. I think we're still we haven't caught up with where we could be, but when you can get pupils engaged in a very accessible, well-developed online platform, you can capture loads of data. You can reduce the workload for parents, without mentioning any specific ones. That there's some AI-powered literacy platforms out there that will not only get kids reading, but they'll pick the book that they want and the topic they want, the reading age they want, and they will monitor their reading speed, their comprehension by asking them questions after virtually every paragraph. It's actually a little bit mind-blowing, but because of where we are, for me to see just how much information you can get, and how tailored and personalized, differentiated, whatever you want to call it, adapted that online learning can be, and with such little expense to teachers, except presenting them with lots of very affable data that they can put in front of inspectors. So yeah, there are some benefits, but again, that's the designers need to be driven by the kids, and it all needs to be triangulated with parents. And there are opportunities, but I would still only have them outside of schools. I'd ban them completely.
Okay,
and I guess if
sorry, I was just going to say we had another comment from from B Buster. Thanks for the comment. Agreeing that students at high school should be required to turn in their phones for the day if they're using it during during class time. Sorry, Ian, go on.
Yeah, just in it because it's come up in a couple of the themed responses. Obviously, we're talking about the evolution of smartphones. AI has come up in a number of the discussions, and I think you spoke there, Mark, about some of its potential positives. In terms of literacy and being able to truly understand what the student is doing when they're reading. Are you already seeing ChatGPT submitting 20, 30, 40, 50% of assignments? What's your experience so far of how that particular genie is coming out of a bottle?
Yeah, maybe not 50%, but definitely a few are coming through that are very suspiciously eloquent for a 12-year-old who can't usually spell. Yeah, definitely starting to come through. I mean, I use it to plan lessons, but I am very much on the sort of AI generated, human checked. And students just aren't quite there yet. They just don't quite know how to use it. We're potentially not teaching them how to use it. As far as I know, it's not on any sort of curriculum, which is part of the problem. I think potentially that's something that is going to start coming out because I can't see it going away. But yeah, it's definitely coming through that, and even AI checkers aren't very good at knowing when something's been made by AI, apparently. But luckily, students so far are not that great at disguising it, I've found.
No, I
We won't tell them, don't worry.
No, what about yourself, Mark?
Which is why I think we need, whilst the soundbite from Labour about oracy is great, they haven't actually done anything particularly helpful in terms of developing that. They've given us this headline, but I think it's time for more viva voces in terms of assessing kids. I think it's time for us to certainly change the English language speaking and listening. Instead of being 100% about reading and writing, we need to make it 50% speaking and listening, and record that because AI can mimic your voice. Would you like me to write this in your style and tone and your voice? And it knows how you sound, and it will make it realistic. It will come to the point where you can even put in those spelling mistakes and those bits and pieces, and just like Bletchley and Enigma, sort of make the right number of errors in order to make it convincing.
And I guess, Nick, just thrown to you, I've shared before that I'm blind, and AI can be very useful in terms of, for me, dropping documents into it which are not accessible for me as a blind person with a screen reader. And AI does the heavy lifting and tells me what's going on. Do you see a potential risk of AI in the education framework?
I think AI is here. So AI is something that's here. It's not something we can shy away from. It's a tool. It's the evolvement of where we're at now. I think the days of as idyllic as it is for students to pop along to the library and sit down and read books, what tends to happen, and I'm certainly noticing this with my daughter, is they go to the library and so they use the library as a quiet place where they can do their work, but they are working from the laptop. So AI is the future. I believe that it's for us to teach children how to use AI to its fullest potential, so that they can then use it as a tool for learning.
Definitely. And coming back to AI, smartphone, social media, I start with you, Rachel. Are the manufacturers and the big tech giants doing enough to help?
Oh, I don't know really. Probably not. I think, sort of Nick alluded to earlier, it's difficult, isn't it? The students are very, they're just useful to those tech giants in a way, because they are buying the phones and they're paying money for all the different apps and resources and stuff that they're using. So it's not really in their interest potentially to do a lot to help, if potentially a cynical way to look at it. But yeah, I think it's really difficult.
So, Mark, your thoughts. There's a lot of talk around harmful content, and I'm sure the big tech giants would tell you how many bots and algorithms and AI things are looking at them to keep everybody safe. Do you think they're doing enough?
Not even close, no, and it's not real people that are looking, is it? It's algorithms, as you say, and this is where the state needs to step in. Discord's used by just about every teenager and 12-year-old go into to sort of get them involved in online gaming chat, and it's supposed to be a 17 plus. I mean, we're miles off. But as the architect of was it Google Alphabet said, you know, the kids need to realize that if they're not paying anything for all of these things, if they're not paying for a product, they are the product, and they're being virtually constructed, and everything will be filtered to them that they want, and they'll just be beneficial consumers to these companies, you know, albeit with a degree of anonymity being retained in order to meet current guidance. I mean, there's not enough education around exactly what people talk about. I mean, finance has been the classic example, hasn't it? You're not really told about mortgages and interest rates and all that sort of stuff from personal finance. And this is another hole in the mesh, you know, gaping hole that, you know, where we're actually failing kids. They don't really understand what the purpose of social media is, how these companies make their money, what you know, what because their purpose isn't primarily safeguarding them. And maybe if they understood that, they'd be a little more careful themselves.
Does that ask the question, though, Mark, that potentially a little bit of a squash ball there that's come back into your court as an educator? Do you think it should be your role to kind of educate children about the wider world more than the curriculum?
No, for sure. It's the old adage, you know, a village to raise a child, and again go back to triangulation and parents and schools and industry and state working together to make sure that education is, you know, fourfold, fivefold, and enables them to use all of these things responsibly. Because exactly as Nick said, AI is not going anywhere. It's only going to grow. It's only going to become more integral in our lives and our careers. And whilst we can't, you know, the opposite of taking it off the curriculum, it needs to be on the curriculum. But I think without smartphones, with greater technology, much more investment and in digital literacy in a meaningful way that isn't just us assuming it's going to happen organically through these phones, through kids' hands and into their brains, when all they're really going to do is swipe and be made a little bit more worldly, as Rachel said before, you know, with shorter attention spans and less interest in a deeper, meaningful education that's got any sort of validated research.
So I guess, Nick, as somebody who works in local government, you know, I'm probably, it's an overreach for Portsmouth to be able to influence Google and Meta. But do you think that the tech companies and the social media platform providers really should be doing more to protect kids from harmful content?
I think it would be nice to see them have a conscience which aligns with the conscience of parents out there at the moment. I mean, conscience is a perception-based thing, isn't it? And if you're an investor in one of the big companies, then it's in your best interest to make as much profits as possible. So for them, they're doing what's best for their driving force. However, for the other side of that, so for people that are detrimental to that, it would be nice to see them kind of police things a little bit better. It's one thing to put something in place, but it's a totally separate thing to actually police that measure. I mean, I think what we're seeing with regards to AI is probably what we saw 120 years ago with the internal combustion engine. You know, for the guy who had the horse and cart 120 years ago, along came the internal combustion engine, and that completely rocketed civilization and it pushed us forward in so many different levels. It wasn't until we started seeing the detrimental effects of that did we then look for something else. But AI itself, per se, I believe everybody's going to jump on the bandwagon now because it is, you know, so groundbreaking. When it comes to social media, that's a slightly different animal. It's a slightly different kettle of fish, and I would like to see some greater restrictions, certainly around the content that social media is putting out and what our children are exposed to when we're not watching.
Did it ask a bigger question, Nick? I know that Mark's touched on, you know, age appropriateness and age verification. You know, it's that piece where, you know, the question asked to a 13-year-old of, you know, are you the age that you say you are? I mean, I noticed early in the piece with with Facebook that my youngest child, who's 21 now, was a year older than I thought he was when he first joined Facebook, when I saw his birth date there. So should there be more onus on the companies to ensure that, you know, the person who says that they're 17 is 17?
Would like to see a little bit more than a tick box exercise. I mean, I'm sure we've all been on certain websites where it said, "Are you over 18?" You tick yes, all of a sudden you're in. That doesn't really seem like there's any real restriction around that other than just tick yes. So we're relying on the youth of today to be honest around their age. And kind of dealing with the youth of today, one thing that they're not tremendously forthcoming on is something that's going to stop them from viewing something they want to view.
Yeah,
No,
and I think
it's as much use as the person on the till in Tesco saying to the 15-year-old picking up a bottle of whiskey, "Are you 18?" and them saying yes, and going with that, isn't it?
yeah, I mean, obviously, I never would have purchased alcohol underage, but age verification, should they be doing more?
I think so. I think I'm fairly certain that I had Facebook before I was 13, and that was the age limit that it was at the time. I'm fairly certain I did. I mean, I was friends with my mum, so it was fine. She could see what I was up to, but I definitely wasn't as old as I was supposed to be. And I'm sure the technology exists. I'm sure I set up a bank account or something on an app, and I had to like put a photo of my driving license and then video my face next to it, saying a like string of words to prove that it was me. It's not that technology doesn't exist to verify those kind of things. It does, but you're right. I mean, I haven't set up a social media profile for a long time, but I'm fairly certain you did just have to put in your date of birth, and then you could just put a false one in, and all of a sudden you were old enough to use the social media profile. So if they're saying that that's the rule and they're enforcing it, then they've kind of got to be doing that. And I don't see that they are, other than literally you put the right date of birth in and you're in.
Absolutely. Mark?
Yeah, I'm realised that I'm not quite as on the fence as I thought I was at the start. And actually, I think there needs to be some pretty robust verification, names, addresses, credit cards, whatever it is, in order to join some of these things, and also and it's not something we've talked about yet, but to gain access to pornography, which is a real concern actually. Given that I grew up and the top shelf was a little bit too high to see some pictures of naked girls with their bras off, and nowadays it's all in very easy reach of all kids, from as soon as they've got a smartphone or a device, something significantly more hardcore than trying to grab Playboy and putting it in between a copy of the Times. I'm really worried about that and the effect that has on young people. And I'm relatively liberal, but I think it's time actually for the gates to come down.
On that, with regards to pornography, I mean, that really is giving our youth today an unrealistic expectation of what a plumber's job actually is.
Yeah.
It is indeed.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess there've been a number of studies, as you say, the ability to access pornography and the extreme nature of it. I've seen some research which says it's very much influencing the way that young people view relationships, and I guess it's something which is particularly harmful. But again, it appears that it's another genie out of the bottle that we don't know how to put the cork back in.
Yeah, it's really concerning, I think, from a teaching point of view. Some of the stuff that you even potentially overhear as a teacher in corridors, in playgrounds, etc., is just really concerning for the age of the child and what they're kind of aware of and what they're seeing. But then I think it does come down a little bit to what they're able to access at home as well. Like I've had conversations with students in sort of year 7, year 8 about a TV show, which I know to be an 18 on sort of Netflix or whatever, and they've been able to access and watch that at home for whatever reason, whether they are just because they have the phones, it's got the app on it, they're watching it in their bedroom. Parents don't actually know what they're accessing, but it is really quite deeply concerning, I think, the stuff that they're aware of, the age they're aware of it at, and then therefore the impact that has on what they think is a normal, appropriate thing to be doing. And we haven't sort of mentioned much about it, but sort of the sending of inappropriate content between them, things like sort of, you know, like nude photos and stuff is a big issue that we come across, as I've been coming across for my whole career. And, you know, I've been teaching for 7 years this year, and there's not been a year gone past where I haven't had a conversation with someone about an inappropriate photo that they've sent that has now been sent widely around the school or around their peers or whatever, and the knock-on effect that that has on them as a human being going forward. So yeah, it is really, really concerning, that element of it particularly.
No, thank you. And I guess that leads us on to our final question, Simon.
So interesting, that conversation has both been not just about the smartphones, but also it's not just the device, it's actually what's on them. It's interesting to think that Mark Zuckerberg doesn't let his kids access social media, which I don't know what people might think of that. But so if you were in a position where kind of, you know, if money or the politics of it wasn't a problem, and you were in a situation where you could implement something, what control or mechanism or measure would you want to see implemented, whether that's legislation, whether that's technology, or whatever that is? And to what ages and by whom? So as in, would you want that to be controlled by the schools? Would you want that to be central government? Would you, whatever kind of, I guess, what's your wish list here to help take, oh, I'm sorry to say the phrase, to take back control of this kind of situation and help our kids get the balance on that. Can I come to you first, Nick?
Yeah, I would personally, as a parent, and my view as a parent would be, I would like to see the age restrictions implemented, and age restrictions to actually mean age restrictions. I'd like certain age restrictions around social media. I'd like certain age restrictions around what we would call adult content, and I would like those to be implemented so that not so much we were in control, but we were aware of what our children were viewing, so that we could kind of bring things back to kids being allowed to be kids.
Okay, thank you very much. Rachel?
Well, if this is my ideal sort of phone utopia world, then I'd like students to kind of be educated a little bit more but children to be educated before they're allowed to use these things. So yes, having the age limits that are actually kept to and they have to kind of adhere to, and they can't just change their date of birth to be 5 years older than they say they are. But also a bit like when you're driving, you have to have a driving license. Actually, are you being educated on what you're seeing and how to deal with that and the impact that's going to have? You know, even if it's every 10 videos you watch on TikTok is a little educational one about the impact of, you know, of using phones and technology and the impact all that kind of stuff has. I think that, you know, could be hugely powerful, because I think students hear a lot from us at school about, oh, you know, this bit of social media is bad and you've got to be careful about this and screen time and blah, blah, blah. And some of them get it from their parents, some don't, but they're not seeing it on the apps and stuff that they're using, because there's sort of, that's not communicated through those. So I think that would be quite powerful as well, just to really educate them on what they're seeing and how that's going to impact them.
Okay, brilliant. Lastly, Mark, what's your wish list?
I think I'm going to agree. I was going to have, listening to Rachel, I've changed it slightly, but I think that any ban on phones or changing on legislation needs to be coupled simultaneously with an increase in the teaching of digital literacy, the resourcing of the teaching of digital literacy in schools, because as I think we've established, if not, you know, in terms of data, certainly anecdotally, that the two aren't compliant. They you know, they haven't got more phones and they're more digitally literate. I'm going to say that I think there should be a complete ban. I like the idea of the pouches and things we've started off with from other countries. And then either verification, because they're going to use them at home, either verification or possibly both, a report about their digital footprint, something that parents don't have to know anything about. It's just sent to them by companies, you know, on an email. This is what your child under 18 has looked at, has accessed this week or this month. I think almost just putting it under the noses of parents the digital footprint for the week would be powerful. And it brings us back to adolescence as well. And I was going to ask Ian and Simon if this was prompted by the surge in online chats and otherwise about adolescence, if that's what inspired this episode.
No,
question for us.
Yeah, I think the short answer is I don't think so. From our perspective, it's something where we are mindful of the fact that we use our phones, and again, it's a topic we've not explored. And with some of these things, it possibly subliminally, as so many of these digital things are. I'd like to think I wasn't influenced by all the chat about adolescence, but perhaps, that's exactly the way the algorithm works, that it's been there enough times that it's subliminally influenced myself and Simon to do an episode on it.
I think for me, the lead in was seeing that there were news reports about what the legislation that Australia is considering, and indeed what the current Labour government are considering in the UK. So for me, that was kind of where the thought kind of came from. I was just conscious of, actually, as someone in their 50s, I went to school at a particular time where this definitely was not a problem. And smartphones have been around for what, 15 years, 20 years? And if legislation is only now still struggling to kind of catch up with that, what hope have we got about dealing with the impacts of AI? As you said, Nick, it's not going away. It's not going anywhere. But if our legislators take 15, 20 years to wake up to the reality of the environment that our laws allow businesses to put in front of us and our children, then perhaps we should be concerned. But at the same time, is there an element of, look, when I was a kid, there were people that were absolutely swearing blind that video games made you want to go out and kill people, which of course they don't. So there's a bit of balance to be struck. Wonderful tool, like lots of wonderful tools, but it can be used for damaging purposes. And for me, it was the question of what's actually really happening. So that's why we've been really glad that you've all spared us your evening to actually tell us what your experiences are and what's going on, rather than just the two of us having an opinion. Because
absolutely,
that sometimes happens.
Yeah, you can. If you want that, you can watch Stettler and Waldorf from the Muppets anytime you like. So on that bombshell, Lou, we'd like to thank you all for coming along this evening, for sparing us a chunk of your time and giving us that real life insight to something which, as Nick has said several times, it isn't going away. So you've been listening to the Pompey Politics Podcast. I've been Ian Tiny Morris, and
our guests this evening have been Mark Coates, Nick Dorrington, and Rachel Speed. Thank you very much for giving us your time. And again, without the hint of irony, if you've been watching, thank you very much for all the lovely comments that the audience have been making. But if you'd like to make sure that you do subscribe on YouTube if you're watching on YouTube, follow on Facebook, do like, follow, comment, etc., and pick us up wherever you're listening to the podcast. If you're listening to us just as audio, I've been Simon Sansbury. Next week we'll be looking at Portsmouth Pride as it steps into the limelight as the host of UK Pride. So do join us next week at 6:27. Thanks very much. Don't forget to like, follow and comment on Facebook, or comment and subscribe on YouTube. Find us on all the social media platforms: Facebook, X, YouTube, Threads, LinkedIn.